Sorry y'all drew the short straw today.
Okay.
All right. Today, we're going to talk about what? Crazy people. How many of us have ever had a crazy relationship? I want you to raise your hand. Crazy relationship. If you did not raise your hand, leave them up, leave them up, leave them up. If you did not raise your hand, that means you're the crazy one. We've all had crazy relationships, right? And sometimes we are the crazy people. Say what? Maybe more than one?
Can't hear you. Turn up your mic.
Turn up the mic. Old folks can't hear me, he said. She's the crazy person in your relationship. I get that. I get that. I feel it in my soul. Because we are like sisters from another mister. So, one day, this girl in college comes home and she comes to her dad and she's like, Daddy, Mom, I've met the man of my dreams, the man I'm going to marry. You know, that's a great word for a dad to hear, you know. And they said, well, we'd like to meet him at least. And she's like, oh, you will. He's coming over for an interview with Dad tomorrow at 3. Okay. So the next day, Mom takes daughter out. Dad waits at home. There's a knock on the door at 3 o'clock. Hi, my name's Larry and I'm going to marry your daughter. And he's like, well, let's come in and talk. Let's have a talk first. So he's like, well, first of all, I want to know what you do. What do you do for a living? How do you make money? What do you do on the side? How are you going to support my daughter? And he's like, well, I really don't work. I don't do anything on the side. I just know God will provide. So he's playing the God card, you know. At this point, you don't know if he's like super spiritual, angelic, or if he needs meds. You just don't know. So he's like, okay, second question. What are your assets? I want my daughter to be safe. So you have money in stocks or bonds? Are your parents wealthy? How are you going to take care of my daughter? And he's like, no, I don't really have any assets either. I've never played with stocks and bonds. I don't know anything about trade and none of that. I just know God will provide. He's like, okay, well, all right, what are your dreams? What are your aspirations? What are your goals in life? Like, well, I don't really believe in that stuff. I don't have any goals. My goal is to marry your daughter, but other than that, you know, I just don't have any goals. But what do you say? God will provide. So they leave, he leaves. He's sitting in the front room in his easy chair, just debating what he's going to do. His wife comes in and she says, well, honey, how'd it go? She's like, well, he said I got good news and I got bad news. She's like, well, tell me the bad news first. And he's like, no, you don't understand. It's really, really bad news. He's like, well, this boy, he has no dreams, no goals, no aspirations, no job. And she's like, well, good Lord, what would the good news be? He thinks I'm God. Dads always think like, they always feel like God's going to provide, right? But this illustrates the core of every crazy making relationship. We have someone in our life that expects us to be their God. They give you their responsibilities. Come on, be God of my emotions. Be God of my finances. Be God of my home. Be God and find me a job. You and it makes you crazy, right? And sometimes you want to strangle some people. But right now, who's asking you to be God in their life? What is making you crazy? Ladies, I am speaking this today because on Mother's Day, I want to give you something that's going to ease your job as a mother. not make it harder. Women as a whole, now some men too, but women as a whole have a harder time setting boundaries in their lives. We are expected to fix everybody's crazy. And it makes us crazy. And it's our job to fix them. Now, women especially feel like we need to fix our problems in our families and with our children, with our spouses. So as we talk about boundaries, I want you to keep in mind that a boundary is what? If you look in somebody's yard, you drive through town, you see fences, you see shrubs, you see signs. When you were a little girl, ladies, do you remember putting a sign on your door that said, "No boys allowed"? You know, that's a boundary. And all of our boundaries aren't the same. Some people have shrubs. Some people have a driveway that is their boundary. Some people are like, do we really know our boundary in our yard? I don't think we really do. Our neighbor mows our yard sometimes. And that's what happens when you don't have boundaries. People move in there. When our children are toddlers, we teach them boundaries. We say, don't touch that fire. Get out of that road. But as they get older, we tend to forget that there should be boundaries as they get older. When my kids were little, I know Amber can say hallelujah to this one. Bedtimes. Bedtimes were a major boundary for me. Like Amber is like, 7:30, go to bed. Because you're making me, what? Crazy, right? So we're going to learn today how to fix those boundaries so that people don't push our buttons and make us crazy. We have boundary intruders that will see us as an easy mark, right? Have you ever seen somebody that you're like, they have, like everybody just uses them? Boundary intruders will see who you are. And they come in and they take advantage of that. And they take advantage of your weaknesses. So ways to set healthy boundaries. We're going to talk about that. Number one is protect yourself. Proverbs 4:23 says, guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life. The Hebrew word for heart is leb, which is also called your soul. But even deeper than that, it means your thoughts, your emotions, your behavior choices you make, all of those things. You are responsible for guarding your choices, your emotions, your thoughts, your heart. That's who we are inside. We are responsible for that. And you have to love yourself enough, ladies, to enforce those boundaries. Matthew 22:39 says, love your neighbor as yourself. God designed us to love ourselves in the beginning, so we would know how to love others. So here are some signs that you're not loving or protecting yourself the right way. I don't want any hands raised on this one, but I want you to consider your heart today. Have you ever said or heard somebody say, but I need to be in a relationship. I need someone to love me. Well, at least this relationship isn't as bad as the last one. They would be lost without me. This relationship just needs a little more time. But if we're friends, just a little bit longer. But, you know, I love them, but they're not always like this. I mean, sometimes they are, but they're not always like this. If we treated people the way that we treat ourselves, would they be more likely to love you or leave you? Would their boundaries put you out because of the way you treat yourself and what you allow in your life that's making them crazy? This is a hard one right here. You can keep your amens down over here, Darren. Learn to love without rescuing. If you are bent towards mercy and compassion, which more women are than not, your first response is to rescue. Hello, moms. What happens when our kid falls and scrapes their knee? We go run it. What happens when somebody shuts their finger in a door? We go run it. What happens when we think they've been in a car wreck? We go running to meet them, right? Are we creating codependent relationships? Now, I'm not saying being a good mom and helping your child is creating a codependent relationship. What I'm saying is rescuing them when they don't need rescuing. When you shouldn't be rescuing. Are you allowing people to pay consequences for their actions, for the choices they made? Are you allowing people to be rescued over and over? Proverbs 19:19 says, hot-tempered people pay the penalty. If you rescue them once, you will have to do it again and again. How many times have we had to rescue people in our lives again and again? I've always told my kids, I will never bail you out of jail. Sorry, you're going to sit there and you're going to learn your lesson. Because sometimes tough love is still love. That is probably one of the best lessons I learned from my dad. Sometimes tough love is still love. When you get that phone call from your friend at 1 o'clock in the morning saying, will you come bail me out of jail? Sometimes you have to say, I love you enough to leave you there. And you have to stay there. We don't always have to be the rescuer. Darren has always told me more than once, see, tough love is easy sometimes. But then other times you want to rescue them. There's certain parts of mom that wants to rescue their kid from this situation or that situation. As they get to be adults, parenting is really tough. Darren has always said to me, Sherrie, you have to let them bloody their own nose. And sometimes you do, but you know it's always hard as a mom to have to sit back and watch your child bloody their own nose. Sometimes it's hard to sit back and watch your friend go through rehab one more time. It's hard to watch your friend end up in jail one more time. It's hard to watch your parent end up in jail one more time. Because sometimes the codependency or the rescue turns around and the child feels like they're responsible for the adult. So here's the recipe for creating a codependent person. If you have done or know someone who is doing this, do whatever it takes to avoid conflict. You know those kind of people that will not endure conflict at all. Provide assistance when they make their poor choices, i.e., go at midnight, 2 o'clock in the morning, bail them out of jail. Feel responsible for their well-being. But if I'm not there to help, who's going to? Have you ever said that? Make excuses for their behavior or choices. Well, Cindy's been through a really tough time lately, and I just don't feel like we should call her on that right now. She's been through a really tough time. Galatians 6:5. And this is all New Living Translation, by the way. For we are each responsible for our own conduct. Creating boundaries is a healthy way of helping people to grow and mature. It helps us to be a great parent, a great friend, a great daughter, a great son, a great spouse. Those boundaries might rub someone the wrong way. I'm just going to warn you ahead of time. Somebody's going to be really ticked off at you when you start setting boundaries. Somebody's going to be really ticked off at you when you go to them and you say, I will not bail you out one more time. You do not get one more dime from me. I will not bail you out of jail one more time. I will not help you in XY situation one more time. They will be mad, but it will make them grow. When they have come past that point and grown past that point, they will say, Dad, you were right. Mom, you were right. Proverbs 19:18. Discipline your children while there is hope. Otherwise, you will ruin their lives. Amen. No discipline ruins our children's lives. If we're constantly rescuing our kids from the consequences, we will be doing it for the rest of their lives. Children who learn no consequences become adults that don't have consequences, or think they don't, until they get big people consequences. When they don't grasp that, when we don't grasp that, the consequences of our actions with our kids, we can never stop being a parent. But there is a time that we have to stop parenting. There's a difference. We will never stop being their mother. You will never stop being their father. But there is a time where you have to stop parenting. Darren had that boundary much quicker than Mom learned it. Mom has been drug along, not wanting to let go of the parenting reins. Women are like that. Amber, no amens back there. And this goes for friendships too, though. We can be a friend and not a parent to that friend. We don't have to parent them and bring them along. They have parents. They've been parented as adults. We need to encourage them, but not parent them. And there's differences. 3. Now this one's not hard for me, but it might be hard for Amanda, or it might be hard for Stacy. Confront a boundary invasion. Who's the non-confrontational people? You don't have to raise your hands. But you have to confront a boundary invasion. Ephesians 4:15, speak the truth in love, growing in every way more and more like Christ. 1 Corinthians 16:13 and 14, be on guard, stand firm in faith, be courageous, be strong, and do everything in love. We have to learn to be assertive without being a jerk, and stand firm and be on guard without being aggressive. I've always been a truth speaker, sometimes a little too much of a truth speaker, and it got me in trouble because I spoke the truth, but the in love part sometimes was missing. But we don't grow if there aren't people in our lives that love us enough to speak the truth to us. And the truth sometimes hurts. Sometimes will rub us the wrong way, will make us mad, will make us irritated. But we need to figure out why that's rubbing us so wrong. We need to figure out why that truth is offensive to us. But sometimes that truth comes as discipline. And I can tell you, as a 40-something-year-old woman, I don't like discipline. When my husband says something to me that disciplines me in his way, sometimes loving, sometimes not, but sometimes it aggravates me. Sometimes it rubs me the wrong way. But as I sit back and think about it, I have to realize that that truth, that discipline is a part of love sometimes. And none of us like it all the time. But Hebrews 12:11 says, no discipline is enjoyable while it is happening. It is painful. But afterwards, there will be peace, a peaceful harvest of right living for those who are trained in this way. Here's the deal. We either bottle up, blow up, or cover up. We lie to them and others when we fail to confront. So then we bottle it up, or we blow up, or we cover it up. Well, that's really, because they're having a hard time, that's really the issue, right? Well, they really didn't have a mom when they grew up, so it's really hard for them to do that. I'll tell you, my parents, hi Mom and Dad, they're going to be watching later. They had neighbors. Great people, okay? My mom and dad are sometimes too great of people. They had neighbors with a family, and they had known the people that lived next door for years and years. Well, all of a sudden, they started coming over every day and staying for dinner. And they would come over every day and stay for dinner. And then the next day, they came over and stayed for dinner. They get food stamps. Mom and Dad didn't. But they came over every day, stayed for dinner. A year later, they're still staying for dinner. My mom and dad didn't confront it. They didn't set a boundary and say, enough is enough. By the time that they wanted to do this, it had already gone on so long, they struggled with the right words not to hurt these people that they loved. It made them, what? Crazy. But if we don't confront it with truth and love, it makes us crazy. 4, set specific boundaries. Now I'm going to talk about specific boundaries that we need to set. Emotional boundaries. What is and what is not allowed in this relationship? What is allowed access to my feelings? And what is not? Determine how much of your personal life will be available to someone. Some will have more, some will have less. It's okay to have friends that don't have complete access to your complete life. It's okay to have friends that know every detail of your life. But you have to have those boundaries. You have to know which people you can set with those emotional boundaries. I'll tell you a story. One time, there was a lady had a best friend. And this best friend had an affair with her husband because this woman knew every detail of their marriage. She knew everything that could possibly be known about her husband. And she used that and then began having an affair with her husband. After that, it was very difficult to have any kind of friends. And I say this because she had to be taught how to trust again. We are not meant to be alone. We are not meant to have no friends. But you have to be taught how to trust again, and it's little by little. It's like, okay, I'm going to throw Chelsea this volleyball. It's just a teeny bit of information. If that information comes back to me, Chelsea can't be trusted. Let's throw that little bit of information over to Brittany. It never came back. All right? So I'll give Brittany a little more information. Now, see, this information for our emotional stability isn't big, right? But we still trust him with a little more. And little by little, we learn who we can trust with our volleyball. Little by little, we learn who we can trust with our emotions. We have to set emotional boundaries and know who we can trust and who we cannot. Set conversational boundaries. This is where I will and I will not allow you to speak to me this way or this way. But you can say this. We have to be respectful of others' perspectives of a conversation. And if we don't feel like it was offensive, that does not matter. What matters is what? Perception. Darren's always said perception rules, right? It's the perception of how the conversation's going. Or I say, you hear Genesis go up to Tiffany, please, Mom, please, please, please. Sophie's mom's letting her go, and everybody else is going to be there. Can I please go? No. Let your no be no. Let your yes be yes. Conversational boundaries, where everybody knows what your conversation means. If you say, I'm not going to deal with this, don't deal with it. The more you allow them to push that, the more they will push it. Or, have you ever been in front of a husband and wife where they're like, she'll be like, well, he said such, such, such. And he'll go, no, that's not what I said. What I said was blah, blah, blah. It goes back to speaking in love. We have to remember that sometimes what we perceive as what they're saying, sometimes we have, in these conversational things, we have to open up the dialogue and say, what are you meaning here? Because this is what I hear. Even with our friends, we have to have that hard conversation of, this is how I felt you meant. This is what I thought you meant when you did that, or when you said that. What did you really mean? Sometimes the conversational boundary isn't about you, and it's about the other person. And we have to allow them an opportunity, sometimes to break our boundary of conversation, to open it up more. 3, physical boundaries. Personal space. Some people, we call them germaphobes, don't like to be touched. Respect that. If you have that boundary, don't be afraid to give that. Personal contact, a hug, a kiss, touching. If you don't feel comfortable with people touching you, just tell them. As someone who was abused, there may be a time, a place, or a person that I have to set a boundary with. No, you can't hug me. No, you've got to stay back. No, I can't do this. And it may upset others. So be it. Relational boundaries. There's an unwritten rule of expectation within us. What I expect from you or what I expect to give you. And sometimes we have to put those boundaries in words. This is what's not allowed. Like the lady with her best friend. I might have wanted to tell you that you're not allowed to sleep with my husband, right? I know it's silly, but that's what I'm talking about. This is what I want. I come in my house and there sits Bobby on my front room couch. I'm not home. But I might have to say, Bobby, I really would rather you wait in your car till I get home. You know? Right? And Darren's car is always locked, so. If we don't communicate, they will violate. If we say this friend is getting a little too comfortable with, my boundaries, then it's time to set your boundaries, right? Time boundaries. Now, this is probably the number one boundary that we allow others to break of ours, is taking up our time. And our time is limited and valuable. Pastor D always says we have 168 hours a week. Use it wisely. And when we allow people, I'm going to tell you, to use those, break that time in there and go, well, this is my time that I'm going to pray. And they want to show up at that time every day. There may have to be a time that you say, no, this is my prayer time. Could you come at XYZ time? Or this is our family time. Could you either come before or the next day? We have to set up those boundaries. Saying no allows you to control your calendar and your emotions. Have you ever had somebody come over and it's 10 o'clock? You have to get up at 4 and you're like, do I tell them I need to go to bed? Do I tell them I need... 11 o'clock, they're still there. 12 o'clock, they're still there. That's what I'm talking about, time boundaries. And it shouldn't offend your friend to say, for you to say, I got to get up at 4 in the morning. I've got to go to bed. You can stay in here if you need to, but I got to go. Number 6, and the last one, and it's probably the most important, spiritual boundaries. Have you, when we have our spiritual boundaries in line with God, He can line us out in other areas. Psalm 101:3 says, I will set nothing wicked before my eyes. I hate the work of those who fall away. It shall not cling to me. A perverse heart shall depart from me. I will not know wickedness. This forms discernment. Not trusting or learning, or not trusting or learning our spiritual teaching isn't a boundary. Discernment, learning what the Holy Spirit is speaking to us, is a spiritual boundary. It tells us we can't take that job. It tells us we need to speak to that person they're hurting. It tells us, God, what is going on here with me? What are you trying to say to me? How am I supposed to be a better person? When my kids were little, we set a spiritual boundary in our home that they were not allowed to watch any shows with witchcraft. Why? Because it desensitizes them. All of a sudden, witchcraft is acceptable. That was a spiritual boundary in our home, that we didn't want our kids to be comfortable with witchcraft. We didn't want our kids to be comfortable with that spirit world. See, when you teach them what is right, they recognize what is wrong. When you jumble it up, all of a sudden, it's hazy. And so we set that spiritual boundary in our home, that those things weren't allowed. Or how about someone knocks on your door to witness, and they bring a different Bible? Do you say, not today? Or do you allow them in? For me, I have a spiritual boundary of, maybe it's not a spiritual boundary, but it's I don't know, you'll figure it out. When you hear good vibes, I can't stand that. Well, I see Amanda rolling her eyes. I'll send you good vibes. Well, I'm like, I don't accept good vibes, but I will accept your prayers. 2 Timothy 1:13 says, hold on to the pattern of the wholesome teaching you learned from me, a pattern shaped by the faith and the love that you have in Christ Jesus. 2 Corinthians 6:17, Therefore, come out from among unbelievers and separate yourselves from them, says the Lord. Do not touch what is their filthy things, and I will welcome you. We don't have to fit in. We don't have to look like everyone else. We have to set boundaries for a spiritual morality that we live by, a spiritual morality that the world doesn't have. 2 Timothy 2:22 through 23. Run from anything that stimulates youthful lusts. Instead, pursue righteous living, faithfulness, love, and peace. Enjoy the companionship of those who call on the Lord with pure hearts. Again, I say, don't even involve in foolish, ignorant arguments that only start fights. Run. Run from anything that stimulates youthful lusts. That's pretty hard today, isn't it? That's really hard in today's world. You're walking down Walmart and you got a girl with a crop top up to here and it's cut down to there. It's hard for us to then go, I'm going this way. That's what it means by run from anything that stimulates youthful lusts. Or how about saying, I'm sorry, I can't even entertain this conversation until we both calm down. Companionship with those, and don't get involved with foolish, ignorant arguments. Romans 13 and 14. Instead, clothe yourselves with the presence of the Lord Jesus Christ, and do not let yourselves think about what ways to indulge your evil desires. Samson failed in a mighty way in this. He did not set spiritual boundaries. He lost his hair, he lost his sight, he lost his freedom, and eventually he lost his life. Mark 8:36, red letter living here. And what do you benefit from if you gain the whole world and lose your soul? Fitting in, looking like everybody else. As I close, we're going to talk about how Jesus set boundaries. He didn't allow his mother or brothers to use their relationship to pull him away from ministry in Matthew 12. They came to him, they asked he was preaching, and his mom and his brothers like, hey, we need Jesus. Disciples came to him, and he's like, oh no, this is what I'm doing. Matthew 16, he didn't allow Peter and the disciples to manipulate him. In Matthew 20, he rebuked the disciples for trying to keep the children away from him. We've all heard that sermon, right? Matthew 6:6, he taught us that we have to set boundaries in personal prayer time and get away and be with the Lord. In Matthew 5:37, he taught us to allow our yes to be yes and our no to be no. In Luke 6:13, he taught us to set our priorities right. In John 5:44, he taught us to please God and not people. In Matthew 21:28 through 31, he taught us to obey God over man. In Matthew 4:1 through 11, Jesus taught us to set boundaries with Satan. The last thing Jesus said to Satan in those was what? Get behind me, Satan, or get away from me, Satan. Depends on which version. But then in verse 11, it says, then the devil left him, and the angels came to attend him. When we are able to set a boundary with Satan, he knows where he can and cannot go. Have you set boundaries with Satan? Set Satan straight with the word. Have you allowed Satan to know your boundaries? Have you moved him in a little more Have you allowed him to cross a boundary that you said you'd never let him cross? No, Satan, you cannot have my family. No, Satan, you cannot have my marriage. No, Satan, you cannot have my children. No, Satan, you cannot have my mental health. As we go into prayer time today, let's think about what we can do better to set boundaries in our lives, in every area of our life, but most importantly, our spiritual life. Moms, don't allow the things that we do every day to get in the way of our time with God. Don't allow the things that we need to do to get in the way of the things that we have to do. Because see, we have to take our personal prayer life, our spiritual life, and that has to come first. If we are not the woman of God, then we are just a woman. If we are not a mom of God, then we're just a mom. We want to stand out and be a mom of God, a woman of God. And making those priorities is what we can do.